It's strange how quiet the world becomes when everyone else is asleep. The soft hum of distant traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. It all feels so normal, so safe. But have you ever taken a walk down your street late at night? Past midnight, when the houses seem to close in on you. The darkness feels thicker. And the stillness unnerving? Let me tell you, things aren't always as peaceful as they seem in the quiet of the suburbs. You see, I live in a fairly typical suburban neighborhood. Neatly lined houses, manicured lawns. The kind of place you'd never expect anything out of the ordinary to happen. But late at night, when the world falls asleep, it transforms. There's a strange energy. A suffocating silence that creeps into the streets. Something about being alone under the pale streetlights. With nothing but your thoughts. And whatever else might be lurking nearby. As I start, I want you to pause for a moment. Put on your headphones. Seriously, you'll want to feel the sounds I'm about to describe. And let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something like this. You never realize how unsettling a familiar place can be until you're alone. Now, if you're brave enough, let's continue. It was a late Friday night, maybe 2 a.m., when I decided to take a walk. I couldn't sleep, something about the oppressive heat. The kind that clings to your skin even in the dead of night. I needed some air. I stepped outside into the cool night. The pavement still warm from the day's heat. The street was deserted, as expected. But there was something different. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The air felt heavier, as if something invisible was pressing down on me. My neighborhood, normally so familiar and comforting, suddenly felt wrong. Do you know that feeling? That creeping sense of unease when you realize something is off. As I walked, I passed house after house, their windows dark and lifeless, and then I noticed it. Every light on the street seemed to be just a bit dimmer than usual, casting strange shadows. Nope, not shadows. There was nothing to cast them. It was as if the darkness itself was moving. I shook off the feeling. Maybe I was just tired, I told myself, but then I heard something. A soft shuffle behind me, just the wind. I thought, or a stray cat. But when I turned, there was nothing. No movement. No sign of life. Would you have turned back at that point? Maybe you would have headed home, locked the doors, and buried yourself under the covers, but not me. I kept going. I've always been stubborn. Maybe too stubborn for my own good. Have you ever done something like that? Kept walking even when your instincts told you to turn around? Share your story in the comments below. I'm curious to know if you've had a similar experience. As I approached the end of the street, there was a flicker. One of the streetlights ahead blinked out, leaving the corner in total darkness. But there, standing just on the edge of where the light had been, was a figure, a man, or at least the shape of one. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't see his face. But he was just standing there, perfectly still, as if he had been waiting for me. There was something deeply unsettling about him. The way he didn't move, didn't seem to breathe. I stopped. Suddenly, the air was thick with tension. I tried to convince myself it was just a neighbor, some guy waiting for his dog or something. But no, deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something wrong with him. Should I call out to him? Should I walk away? What would you do in my place? I want to know. Comment below and tell me. Then, without a sound, he moved, but it wasn't a normal movement. It was fast, too fast. One moment, he was standing still. The next, he was just gone. My heart nearly stopped. My legs turned to lead, and I could barely breathe. I don't know why, but I ran. I sprinted back up the street, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. But the faster I ran, the slower it felt like I was moving. You ever had that dream? The one where you're running, but you can't seem to get anywhere. I finally made it back to my house, and slamming the door behind me, locking it, bolting it like I could somehow keep whatever that was out. My heart was still racing, my breath ragged, and then the phone rang. I froze. Who would be calling at this hour? I picked it up, hesitating, and hello? At first there was only silence, but then a faint breathing. Slow, deliberate. Who is this? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. More breathing, and then a soft whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but whatever it wasn't human. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but then the phone rang again and again. I didn't dare answer it. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, hoping, praying that whatever was outside would just leave me alone. Have you ever received a phone call like that, late at night, with no one on the other end, or worse, someone or something? Let me know in the comments if you've had that experience. The night dragged on. Hours passed, and I was too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. And then, just as dawn was breaking, there was a knock at the door. Soft at first, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. I didn't want to answer it. I knew something terrible was on the other side. But the knocking wouldn't stop. My head pounded with every beat. It was relentless. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I crept toward the door, my body shaking. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I opened the door just a crack, just enough to peek outside. There was no one there. Just the empty street. But as I turned to close the door, I felt a hand. Cold, clammy, and impossibly strong. It grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the darkness. And that's when I saw it. The face of the man from the corner. Twisted, unnatural, his eyes wide and empty. He didn't say a word. Just stared at me with those hollow eyes. I screamed, pulling away with every ounce of strength I had, slamming the door shut. But even now, sometimes I hear him, late at night. Knocking. If this story left you chilled, go ahead and like the video. But more importantly, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone in the middle of the night? Have you ever encountered something you couldn't explain on those quiet suburban streets? Comment below and share your story with me. I'll be reading them. And don't forget to subscribe. The next story I have for you, it's going to be even more unsettling. Good night. And keep an eye on the corners of your street. You never know who or what might be watching. Transition line. When I was younger, there was this rumor. Every suburb has one, right? The kind of story that gets passed around by kids at sleepovers, or whispered about at the local coffee shop by parents who pretend not to believe it. But the thing about this particular story is that it wasn't just a rumor. It had weight. People disappeared. I grew up in a small suburban neighborhood just outside of Boston, the kind where everyone knew everyone, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. It was a cozy place, well-kept lawns, tall oak trees lining the streets, and houses that looked like they'd been plucked from the pages of a home decor magazine. But just like every suburb, ours had a dark spot, a house, if you can believe that. An old abandoned colonial on the corner of Maple Street and Sycamore. Everyone called it the Lacey house. It had been empty for as long as I could remember, a relic of another time. Rumor had it that the family that used to live there disappeared without a trace sometime in the 70s, leaving behind a house full of furniture and a string of ghost stories that refused to die. The adults would brush off the rumors as nonsense, but there were too many stories. Too many people who'd gone into that house on a dare and come out different, quiet, withdrawn. Sometimes they'd move away, while other times they'd stay, but you'd never see them after dark again. I always chalked it up to exaggeration, a little excitement in an otherwise sleepy neighborhood. Until I found myself standing outside that house one summer night at 3 a.m., wondering if all those stories were just that, stories. Have you ever felt compelled to explore a place you knew you shouldn't? Like the pull of something darker than curiosity. If you have, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not the only one. I don't know why I decided to go in that night. Maybe it was the late hour. Or maybe it was that feeling I couldn't shake, that the house was calling to me. It sounds ridiculous, but there's no other way to explain it. The front gate was hanging off its hinges, the rusted iron groaning as I pushed it open. The yard was a jungle of overgrown weeds, and the house itself looked like it was on the verge of collapse. But it wasn't the house's state of disrepair that unnerved me. It was how quiet it was. Not even the wind stirred. The front door was unlocked, of course. I stepped inside, and immediately the air felt different. It was cooler, like stepping into a refrigerator. The musty smell of old wood and dampness clung to me. The floor creaked under my weight, each step echoing through the empty rooms. It was strange, though. Despite the years of abandonment, there wasn't a single speck of dust. Furniture, though old and dated, looked like someone had just left it there yesterday. The place was frozen in time. And then there was the clock. An old grandfather clock in the corner, ticking away the seconds like it had somewhere to be. But here's the thing, it was 3 a.m. when I walked in, and yet the clock's hands were frozen at midnight. I don't know why, but that made my skin crawl. The house was so still, yet I felt like something was watching me. You ever get that feeling? Like you're not alone in an empty room? It's subtle at first, like a nagging thought you can't shake. But it grows. It festers. Do you believe places can hold on to the people who once lived there? Can houses remember? Let me know what you think in the comments. I wandered through the house, room by room, expecting to find something, though I wasn't sure what. But everything looked normal. Until I got to the basement door. It was a simple wooden door at the back of the kitchen. Nothing unusual. But there was something about it. Something wrong. My hand hovered over the doorknob, and for the first time that night, I hesitated. I heard a sound then. Faint, like distant whispers coming from the other side of the door. It wasn't a voice exactly, more like the echo of one. I opened the door. The air in the basement was thick, heavy, like walking through water. And those whispers, they were louder now. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound filled the room, bouncing off the walls, echoing from nowhere and everywhere all at once. My skin prickled. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly afraid. It wasn't until I saw the marks on the walls that I realized how bad it was. Faint scratches. Barely noticeable at first, but they were there. Dozens. Maybe hundreds of them. Like someone or something had been trying to claw its way out. And then the door slammed shut behind me. If you were there, what would you have done? Would you have run? Or stayed to see what happened next? Tell me in the comments. Maybe you would have handled it better than I did. I raced up the stairs, throwing my body against the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, like they were trying to tell me something. But the words, they didn't make sense. It was like hearing someone speak underwater, muffled and distorted. I don't know how long I stood there, pounding on the door and screaming for someone, anyone to let me out, but then I heard it. The grandfather clock. Its chimes echoed through the house, deep and ominous, like the tolling of a bell at a funeral. And that's when I realized it was midnight again. I didn't understand how. When I walked in, it had been 3 a.m. And yet now, the clock was striking 12. Over and over. Midnight, it seemed, was all that existed in the Lacey house. In the darkness, I could hear something else now. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the floor above. Heavy, like someone wearing old-fashioned boots, the kind you'd hear in an old colonial home. They stopped directly above me. I'm not sure what terrified me more, that someone or something was upstairs, or the fact that it knew I was down here. What would you do if you heard footsteps above you in an empty house? Would you go up to check, or would you try to escape? Share your thoughts below. I want to know how you'd handle it. I didn't want to go upstairs. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to stay put, to find another way out. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were pacing now, and back and forth, as if they were waiting for me, with no other choice. I climbed the stairs. My legs felt like lead, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. The moment I reached the top, the footsteps stopped. The hallway was empty, the house silent except for the ticking of that damn clock. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, standing in the doorway at the end of the hall. It wasn't moving, just watching. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to face it, but when I did, it was gone. I don't know how I got out of that house. I don't remember running, but somehow I found myself outside, the cool night air stinging my face, and I never went back, and neither did anyone else, as far as I know. But sometimes, late at night, and I still hear those footsteps, pacing, waiting. Have you ever felt like a place was watching you, like it wanted you to stay? If you have had an experience like this, you share it with me in the comments. Let's see how many of us have encountered something we can't explain. Every suburb has its hidden corners, the kind of places you don't think twice about during the day, but at night they take on a different character. For me, it was the playground at the end of our cul-de-sac. A small park, really, tucked between two rows of houses, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. It was a place for parents to bring their kids after school, for teenagers to hang out on weekends. But after dark, it was empty, always empty. I had never been one to fear the dark. Late-night walks were my thing, something to clear my head after a long day. But that playground, something about it made me uneasy. It was a Tuesday night, past midnight, when I found myself walking past it again. The cool autumn air had a bite to it, enough to make me pull my jacket tighter around me. The swings, always abandoned at this hour, swayed gently in the breeze. But there was no wind that night, not a single gust. Just still the heavy air, like the sky was waiting for something. Have you ever walked past a place so familiar, but felt like you were seeing it for the first time? Like suddenly the ordinary became strange? Let me know in the comments if you've had that feeling before. I don't know why, but that night I stopped. Something caught my attention, like a whisper in the back of my mind telling me to pay closer attention. I stood at the edge of the park, the streetlight behind me casting long, thin shadows across the playground. And then I heard it, faint at first, like it was carried on the breeze. Laughter. It wasn't the playful sound of kids during the day. No, this was different. Hollow, too high-pitched. It echoed in a way that shouldn't have been possible, like it was coming from everywhere at once. My heart skipped a beat, and I took a step back, suddenly aware of how alone I was. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the street was empty. The houses on either side of the playground were dark, their windows like cold, unblinking eyes. I turned back to the swings, my eyes scanning the empty seats. Nothing. But that laughter, it didn't stop. It was getting louder. Would you have stayed? Or would you have run? Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you heard laughter coming from an empty playground? I don't know what compelled me, but I stepped closer. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was that part of me that always had to prove I wasn't afraid. I made my way past the swings, the wood chips crunching softly under my feet, every step echoing in the unnerving silence. That's when I saw. Sitting on the bench in the far corner of the playground was a woman. She was sitting unnaturally still, her back to me, her long, dark hair falling over her shoulders, blending into the black of her coat. Her presence was so unexpected, so out of place, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined her. But there she was, sitting there as if she had been waiting for someone. My first instinct was to leave, to turn around and walk away without a second glance. But something in the pit of my stomach told me I couldn't. It wasn't just her stillness that unnerved me. It was how I hadn't noticed her until that moment. As if she had materialized out of the shadows themselves. "Hey," I called out, my voice wavering despite my best efforts to sound confident. She didn't move, didn't turn around, she just sat there. What would you have done? Would you have approached her, or would you have left her alone? Share your thoughts with me in the comments. I'm curious how you'd handle something like this. Against my better judgment, I took a step forward, and then another. With each step, the air grew heavier, thicker, as if the atmosphere itself didn't want me there. My throat felt dry, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I was just a few feet away when my phone rang. The sudden noise made me jump. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled it from my pocket. The screen showed an unknown number. For a moment I hesitated, but something told me I needed to answer it. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. At first there was nothing, just static. And then a faint voice, so distorted I could barely understand it. "Don't I go near her." The line went dead. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I looked up, expecting the woman to still be sitting there, but she wasn't. The bench was empty. I spun around, my eyes darting across the playground, but she was nowhere to be seen. Have you ever received a phone call that felt wrong? Like someone or something was trying to warn you? Let me know in the comments. Maybe you've had a similar experience. The playground felt different now, darker. The shadows seemed to stretch farther, swallowing the faint light from the street lamp. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answers to. And then I heard it. Soft at first, barely noticeable. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, listening as those footsteps got closer. Closer! My skin crawled, my heart hammering in my chest. Finally, I forced myself to turn. The park was empty. No one was there. But the footsteps, they didn't stop. They were all around me now, circling, growing louder with every passing second. I backed away, my eyes scanning the shadows, but there was no one, nothing. Just the darkness, pressing in on me. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Stayed? Run? Share your thoughts. I want to know if you'd be braver than I was. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in that suffocating silence. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps stopped. The air shifted, and I could breathe again. I turned and ran back toward the street, my heart racing. The lights from the nearby houses felt too far away, like they were flickering in and out of reality. But just as I reached the sidewalk, I glanced back one last time. And that's when I saw her. The woman was standing in the middle of the playground now, facing me. Her face pale and expressionless, her eyes dark and empty. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel her watching me, her presence weighing down on me like a heavy, invisible hand. I ran the rest of the way home, not daring to look back again. Closing engagement. Have you ever felt like something was following you? Like a presence you couldn't see but could feel? If you've had an experience like this, tell me about it in the comments. Let's see how many of us have been haunted by something we can't explain. And remember, sometimes the quietest streets hold the darkest secrets.